Sarah reached out to touch the baby elephant's trunk, expecting nothing. But then Juma's eyes locked onto hers, and he stretched forward as though pulling her into his world. A wave of raw emotion surged through her, breaking through the grief she thought she'd buried. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The sun dipped lower, casting its golden hue across the vast stretch of the savanna, wrapping the landscape in a warm, almost ethereal light. Sarah's breath slowed, and time seemed to dissolve into the stillness of the moment. She had always imagined the savanna would feel vast, wild, and untouched, but it was the quiet presence of Juma, this small elephant, that filled her senses now. She could hear the rustling of dry grass beneath his feet, the soft murmurs of distant birds, the faint hum of the wind as it stirred the dust at her feet. But none of these sounds reached her in the way the silent, steady gaze of the elephant did. His eyes, so deep, so knowing, held her. There was something ancient in them, something that transcended the mundane struggles of the world. It was as though Juma, in his simple existence, understood something she could not put into words. She had come here to escape, to bury the grief that had gnawed at her since her mother's death, but all it took was this one fleeting connection to remind her that grief, in its truest form, was not something to be escaped from. It was something to be shared, witnessed, and in this moment, Sarah felt the weight of it soften. Juma's trunk extended toward her, long and leathery, yet surprisingly gentle in its approach. She had heard the stories of elephants' intelligence and empathy, but never had she understood it so viscerally. The air around them thickened with a tension she couldn't describe, a quiet anticipation that surged between them. His trunk curled ever so slightly, the motion fluid, instinctual. There was a yearning in that motion, a silent plea for something that only they, in their shared silence, could understand. The contact of his trunk against her fingertips was like a jolt of electricity, soft yet profound. A ripple moved through her, not in her body, but in the core of her being, as if something had shifted, realigned. The pain she had carried for so long, the hollow ache of her loss, seemed to ease. She felt the weight of her own sorrow, not disappear but transform. It was no longer a burden she bore alone. In that brief, fleeting touch, Juma seemed to offer not answers, but a silent understanding, a communion of sorts. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet of the savanna surround her, letting the rhythm of her breathing match the gentle sways of the grass in the breeze. In those moments, the outside world fell away. She was no longer a tourist with a camera, no longer a woman broken by grief. She was simply here, in this place, with this creature, sharing an unspoken understanding. The murmurs of the crowd around her were distant now, like a soft echo lost in the expanse of the land. Sarah didn't hear them. She didn't want to. There was nothing more she needed than this moment, this fragile, beautiful connection that felt as though it had always been meant to happen. Even before she had arrived here, she was no longer searching for solace. It had come to her in the form of Juma's soft, wrinkled trunk reaching out to touch her life. And in that touch, she found something she hadn't expected: peace. The ripple of Juma's touch on Sarah's skin had set something in motion far beyond the physical connection between elephant and human. The initial warmth of the encounter lingered in her mind, but now it felt almost ethereal, like a memory already fading, shifting out of reach. The following days unfolded in a blur as her name spread across screens, her story shared, reshared, analyzed. People were speaking of her moment with Juma as if it were a manifestation of something deeper, some cosmic alignment between grief and grace. The photos, the video clips, captured the fleeting contact between them in such striking clarity that they seemed to freeze time. But the images alone couldn't convey the invisible force that had passed between them. As Sarah scrolled through her inbox, the overwhelming flood of messages, some kind, others insistent, began to unravel the quiet peace she had once felt. Strangers spoke to her of their own losses, of the yearning for answers, for healing, for some glimpse of light amidst the suffocating darkness. Some suggested it was fate. Others called it a miracle. A few even claimed that the elephant had chosen her, that Juma had sensed something in her, recognized her grief, and had extended his trunk as an offering, a gesture meant to ease the burden she carried. But what if this was simply the lens through which people projected their need for meaning? Sarah felt unease coil in her stomach. Was it possible that her own need for healing had inflated the significance of the moment? Was it just the force of human desire for connection that had made the brief contact feel so profound? The logical part of her, the part that had always operated on facts and reason, told her to dismiss the idea of a divine bond between human and animal. But the emotional part of her, the part that had felt the electricity in Juma's touch, struggled to refute it. In her quieter moments, she would remember the way his eyes had locked onto hers, those deep, knowing eyes. The weight of it pressed upon her, not with the heaviness of doubt, but with the lightness of something undefined, something unspoken that hovered in the air. It felt too profound to be dismissed, too intimate to be classified as mere coincidence. There was a question hanging in the space between her thoughts, one she couldn't shake off. Was this a gift or a calling? Her nights were filled with restlessness. Her thoughts cycled around the encounter as she replayed every detail over and over. Juma's slow, deliberate motion, his gentle insistence, the unhurried way he reached for her. There was a quiet wisdom in that gesture. As much as she wanted to retreat from the sudden spotlight, to disconnect from the questions she wasn't sure how to answer, she couldn't shake the sense that this was only the beginning of something bigger. People were looking to her now, as if she held the key to a mystery that extended far beyond that fence, beyond the savannah, even beyond the elephants themselves. And what if she wasn't ready for whatever was to come? What if, in her search for healing, she had inadvertently opened a door that couldn't be closed again? The thought stirred a blend of excitement and trepidation in her, an unfamiliar mix of awe and apprehension that left her uncertain whether she wanted to find the answers at all. What was the true meaning behind this bond? And if she found it, would it be more than she could bear? The days following the viral video felt like an emotional roller coaster, each new wave of attention a sharp jolt that left Sarah reeling. At first, the shock had been nothing more than a faint, unsettling ripple, an uncomfortable awareness that the private moment she'd shared with Juma was now public. But as the video spread across screens, as experts and pundits weighed in, the ripple grew, turning into a tidal wave that threatened to drown her. The footage, captured from behind, had shown a side of the interaction Sarah hadn't fully comprehended at the time. As her hand gently released from Juma's trunk, the elephant's sudden, almost frantic reach toward her face seemed to suggest something far more urgent than a peaceful connection. His trunk extended with a jerky, almost desperate movement, as though he needed something from her, something she hadn't given him, or perhaps something more. The way he stretched toward her, reaching beyond the physical touch, seemed to convey an unspoken plea, an intensity Sarah hadn't noticed in the moment. It was almost as if he had sensed the depth of her grief, the rawness of her vulnerability, and in response sought to bridge that emotional divide. But the experts had spoken quickly, and their words twisted the narrative. Elephants, it turned out, were not merely gentle creatures. They were highly sensitive, capable of perceiving subtle shifts in human emotions. They could pick up on the faintest tremors of sadness or distress, their extraordinary empathy often guiding them to seek out those who were in pain. Juma's behavior, it seemed, was no different from that of other elephants, an instinctual response to a person's sorrow, an attempt to comfort, or perhaps to connect in a way only animals with their unspoken language could. Sarah's heart sank as the realization began to settle in. Had her connection with Juma been nothing more than his instinctive reaction to her grief? She had felt something in that moment, something deeply healing, something profound. But now she couldn't shake the gnawing question. Was that healing a result of her own emotional projection, Or had Juma merely recognized her vulnerability and responded accordingly? The idea of it being an automatic reaction, driven solely by his ability to sense her pain, stripped the moment of its magic. The raw, intimate bond she thought they shared suddenly felt hollow, reduced to a mechanical response rather than a meaningful connection. The flood of comments that followed only deepened her uncertainty. Some people were still enchanted by the footage, calling it a beautiful, emotional display of empathy. Others, however, questioned the authenticity of the bond, accusing Sarah of exaggerating the moment for personal gain. The questions stung more deeply than she cared to admit. Had she been a fool, reading into Juma's actions something that wasn't there? Had she allowed herself to be swept away in her own desperation for healing, only to be confronted with the harsh reality that it was never truly about her? And yet, despite the questions and the criticism, there lingered a flicker of something inside her, a quiet voice that refused to be silenced. Something in her still believed that the connection, however complicated or elusive, was real. She couldn't erase the feeling of Juma's trunk against her skin, the look in his eyes, the way the world had seemed to pause in that instant. Whether it was his empathy, her grief, or something else entirely, there had been a shift, something that had touched her in a way nothing else had. But now, with the flood of opinions and the barrage of scrutiny, that quiet flicker felt fragile, as if it might fade at any moment, swallowed by the uncertainty and the noise. The healing she had once felt so strongly was now overshadowed by doubt, and Sarah found herself grappling with an unsettling question. Was this healing something she had truly experienced, or had it simply been a mirage, a momentary illusion she clung to in the face of her pain? As the days passed, the noise from the viral storm faded into a dull hum. The flood of messages, comments, and opinions had once consumed her, leaving her to question the very essence of what she had experienced. But as Sarah stood once more at the edge of the sanctuary, the cool breeze brushing against her skin, a wave of clarity washed over her. The distant silhouette of Juma, grazing peacefully under the soft, golden glow of the setting sun, seemed to anchor her in that moment of quiet revelation. She no longer needed validation. She no longer needed the world to confirm what she had already known deep down, that the healing she sought had always been within her reach. The social media frenzy, though initially overwhelming, had slowly begun to recede. Each new post, each interview request, each analysis of the viral video had only served to cloud the simplicity of her connection with Juma. She had been caught in the whirlwind of others' interpretations, their projections of meaning and significance onto something that was, at its core, a deeply personal moment. And yet, as Sarah watched Juma's steady movements, the rhythmic sway of his trunk as he foraged, she realized something profound. The healing she had longed for hadn't come from the world's response to that moment. It had come from the moment itself. Juma had not been the catalyst for her healing. He had been the mirror. He had reflected back at her the quiet power of compassion, the silent understanding that sometimes the smallest of gestures, an outstretched trunk, a glance, an unspoken connection, could offer solace when words failed. It wasn't about the grand meaning others ascribed to the interaction, nor was it about any external validation. It was the quiet knowing that she had been seen, truly seen, in a way she hadn't felt in months, perhaps years. And in that gaze, whether from Juma or from the people who had watched the video, she had found a moment of peace, a small flicker of light in the midst of her grief. For so long, Sarah had looked outward for signs, for confirmation that she was allowed to grieve, that her pain was valid. The world had offered its opinions, and in turn, she had been consumed by their weight. But now, standing there, feeling the sun's warmth on her face, and watching Juma's peaceful presence, she understood. True healing wasn't about the validation of others. It was about allowing herself to be present, to be vulnerable, to accept the quiet kindness of the universe in whatever form it came. As the viral video continued to spread, Sarah no longer felt the weight of its scrutiny. She had come to see that it didn't matter how the world interpreted that moment. The simple truth was this: she had been given a gift, not in the form of an elaborate story or a grand narrative, but in the form of a moment that had reached her heart in a way nothing else had. It had been a quiet exchange, no words, no grand gestures, just the unspoken understanding that sometimes, when we least expect it, the universe offers us what we need. Sarah smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in months. The questions, the doubts, the analysis, they no longer held the power they once had. She was at peace, and that peace, she realized, was all she needed. In the end, the connection had been real, not because it was understood by the world, but because it had touched her in the way only something truly meaningful could. The rest didn't matter. She had found what she was looking for, not from the opinions of others, but from the stillness of the moment itself.